So what people call sin cannot be called sin if it is not a general thing. For example, if you call it sin, but if your child does it, it's not a problem. That is not sin. Man's definition of sin is selfish. And that's why what man calls sin cannot be accepted as a universal definition of sin. Man's definition of sin is selfish and corrupt. If someone else does it, I am ready to punish the person to a fault. But if I'm the one that do it, I find a way to hide it. That is not sin. Every time man comes out and points something as sin, he selfishly hides himself away from that thing he has called sin. So we cannot call men's dictate sin. We cannot call anything that a man calls sin, sin, because if it happens to him, he does not see himself as a sinner. For example, let me use stealing for example. A lot of people can gather and kill a thief, but everybody knows one way or the other you are stealing somewhere. It might be the meat you are stealing in the pot, it's still stealing. It might be this thing, it is still stealing. When they caught the woman under adultery, why was she the only one that was caught, even though everybody was also doing the same thing? And that's why when Jesus said, if you are without sin, cast the first stone, every man left. That's because man's proclamation of sin on another man is not sin. And that's just the truth. When man comes and said this thing is a sin and they are talking about it, man's definition of sin is not sin. Why? Because it is selfish, it is corrupt, and it is not universal. For example, something can happen to someone out there and it is easier for you to use your mouth to condemn it. Meanwhile, you are also guilty of that thing in your own inner closet, and you know. Every definition of sin that comes from man's mouth, what man calls sin is not sin. It's just a selfish way of diverting attention away from yourself so that other people will not know that you are committing that same thing that you call the sin. So, man's definition of sin is not sin. The Bible says in the book of Romans chapter 4 verse 14 that if a man calls something unclean, to him, not to everybody, it is unclean. If any man estimates something as unclean, to him it is unclean, not to everybody. So man's definition of sin is not universal. Titus chapter 1 verse 15 says, to the pure all things are pure, but to the defiled nothing is pure. So you can't, even a defiled man, as much as we know that sin is general, a defiled man can never point out accurately and sincerely what sin is. Follow me on this journey. This is a journey. Whatsoever man calls sin is not sin. It's not the definition of sin. Why? Because it is selfish, it is corrupt, it is not universal. For example, you are wearing trousers here in Nigeria. There are churches that will call it sin. Those same religious gatherings, those same religious body will not call it sin abroad. For example, there are things that you are doing that has to do with locations. If it is tied to a location, it's not sin. If it is tied to a location, it's not sin. If it is tied to an action, it's not sin. If it is tied to a status, it's not sin. If it is tied to a selfishness, for example, if you do it, it's not sin. But when someone else is doing it, you are quick to condemn it. It's not sin. For example, you are the one doing something you are doing simply because they've not caught you. Someone else does it, and you are quick to point out that this person, that's not sin. We all know that it's just your own way of covering up your own lies, your own faults, so that people will not look at you and divert their heart away from it. Sin as spoken by man is not sin. When someone mentions that something is sin, is a lie, that's not sin. Something. Jesus healed on the Sabbath, and they came and met Jesus. Why is it that you healed on the Sabbath? And Jesus said to them, if it is your donkey that fall in a ditch on the Sabbath, won't you go and save it? So this thing that you've just come to tell me now that is sin is a lie. You yourself, you are not fulfilling it. Ultimately, what shows you what is sin and what is not sin is death and life. Because the wages of sin is death. Our tribe, this is what we call sin. It's not sin. It's just to your tribe. How can somebody be sin in Nigeria and it's not sin abroad? The moment you leave Nigeria, it's no longer sin. Anything that location, status, anything changes, it's not sin. Someone will come somewhere and because he's married, You now start pointing fornication is sin. We know what you were doing before you got married. So that a man comes and proclaim it is not sin. It's just a man trying to cover up his own selfishness by diverting other people's attention away from him to someone else. It is that simple. How come you were poor and now you are rich? Now poverty is sin. You see, what men call sin is only born from selfishness and a corrupt mind. And the Bible says, to that person that calls it sin, it is sin. To God, it is not sin. To mankind, it is not sin. This is the first of a lot of teaching that will be coming on sin. Please stay tuned and like, share, comment. I am Gamaniel Adeyemi. Bye. Remember, whatsoever man calls sin is not sin. What men call sin is not sin. If it is tied to a geographical location, a status, is not universal, it's not sin. If someone else's child does it, you are quick to complain. But if you do it, it's not a problem. That is not sin. Bye.